Now, I think it might be time to start. So once again, welcome everybody. I'm going to end that poll, but I can see, unlike State of Origin, Queensland actually has the most participants and is the winner tonight, but not next Wednesday night. I'm wearing blue today, and I'm not sure why I'm so welcoming to a Queenslander this week. But for those of you who are not from New South Wales or Queensland, you probably don't know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about State of Origin. But let's move on to other things, our webinar. I can see Kathy's on our screen. She's going to be our key speaker joining us shortly. Let's just go through what our agenda is for today. So I'm going to go through, a lot of you did that little survey for me when you registered for this webinar. So I'm going to go through those results with you, and then I'm going to hand it over to Kathy, who is going to do a fantastic presentation. No pressure, Kathy, but I've had a sneak preview and I know it's amazing. I'm going to talk a little bit about how digital can help with differentiation. And then, as I said, we're going to have time for Q&A at the end. Now, the question that you were asked, now, I should just explain too, you can probably tell I was a primary school teacher. People spot that fairly quickly. I think it's the voice. But I did that for a very long time in various schools in New South Wales, over 25 years of primary school teaching and leading. And then I joined the amazing world of EdTech about 8 or 9 years ago. And I haven't forgotten what it's like to be in the classroom after all of those years. So I posed this question to you. What do you find is the most challenging aspect of teaching? And these were your options: finding good resources, differentiation, keeping students engaged, getting through all of the content, or maybe you just don't feel confident with some subjects. Now, if you're a high school teacher, you probably specialise in a particular subject. If you're a maths teacher, so you probably feel pretty confident with maths. But coming from a primary school perspective, I know I met many a teacher who, for example, didn't feel confident with maths, for example, and didn't want to teach year 5 and 6 for that reason. So that's why I threw that one in. And I'm quite confident if we had have had another option there, all of the above, that probably would have been the winner, because I look at that list and I think I get a knot in my stomach, because I remember all of those things caused a bit of anxiety. And getting through the content, it took me a few years, but eventually I just accepted the fact it wasn't going to happen. There was no way I could get through everything. Anyway, what was the most common response, the most popular? Not surprisingly, differentiation was, well, given the topic for tonight's webinar, I guess that's not surprising, but it was very closely followed by keeping students engaged and then finding resources. They were also common responses as well. The good news is, I think we've got those things covered tonight. So I'm hoping we can really, really help you with those aspects of teaching. Now I'm going to shortly hand over to Kathy. I won't read everything here. She's just got a wealth of experience in this field. I first met her up in Queensland. She's in the beautiful Hervey Bay area at Bayside Christian College. I went to her lovely school a couple of months back, and I was just so impressed with her depth of knowledge and wealth of experience that she has in this area, and said, please, please, please do a webinar with us, because I know that you guys out there could really benefit from her experience. So Kathy, you can turn on your microphone, and welcome to you up in Queensland. How's the weather up there?
It's actually just a little bit cool. It actually rained this afternoon, right on end of school time for whatever reason. It always happens at 3 o'clock, just in time for pickup. Perfect.
The bell rings and it rains. Yeah,
absolutely.
Murphy's Law. I've not forgotten that either. Anyway, I'm going to go on to mute, and you've had enough hearing from me. I'm going to, I just looked at that poll. Definitely Queensland was the most common state, but we've got people from all around Australia today, so that's really exciting. All right, over to you, Kathy.
Yeah, start my PowerPoint. There it is. I know that everyone's going to be coming from a range of experiences, whether in the classroom or as a parent like myself of a child with many letters after their name. You're going to have a lot of experiences that will affect you in the classroom, as well as your understanding of how you actually work with these kids. Next one. Jackie, slide. So the purpose of this actual PD, I'm hoping to get across to everyone what actually is differentiation, The difference between an adjustment and a modification, it's very, very important because it's a different way of looking at how you work with the students. But of course, the issue with differentiation is accommodating for all of those different kids within the classroom. Of course, we've also got our extension kids, so we can't forget those as well. Even those kids are teachers working with year 11 and 12s. You might have ARAs, the access arrangements and reasonable adjustments. And actually, who is responsible for all this differentiation in the classroom? Thanks. I don't know if any of you have actually seen this video. I saw it many, many moons ago. And if you ever get a chance, if you just look up cat herding on the internet, you'll actually see the video clip. I just thought it was a bit long to actually add that into today's PD as well. But it is absolutely worth the viewing. So this is just what I believe is exactly how we have our days at school, trying to differentiate, trying to cater for all those things around that picture of that man, but also how the kids are so different. Every kid's an individual kid. They're all going off in their own directions, and we're trying to gather it all together. Next. So on the next two slides, which I won't read out exactly, hopefully all of you are aware of the federal and state legislation that underpins all of our differentiation in the classroom and why we actually need to do it. We're not doing it just because we want to do it. We're doing it for legal reasons. There are legal things that we need to consider when we're looking at the students and how we're going to cater for them. Next slide. And that's another one which I'm sure you've all heard of, the Melbourne Declaration and the updated one from Alice Springs. If you haven't, please read all of those documents and make sure you're across all of them. Next. So the main thing with our differentiation is that we are all aiming for inclusive practices across our classrooms. We're trying to cater for every single child's needs, which is a mammoth task. Over the years, as I've worked in classrooms and across state schools, across independent Lutheran, Catholic, and now Baptist school, I've found that the number of kids who are needing extra adjustments or extra support, and those kids that have actually got diagnoses now, has absolutely blossomed. We would have quite a number of students in our classrooms at varying degrees of need. Those kids with disabilities, those kids who are gifted and talented. And I can't stress enough that the kids with gifted and talented cannot fly under the radar and be forgotten. It is highly important that they are also differentiated for in your classrooms. At the same time, we're trying to cater for everyone's different learning styles and recognising that everyone is different. Next. So what actually is differentiation? We're trying to maximise the learning outcomes for everyone in our classroom while keeping our educational experiences with the kids as high as we can. I always say you start with where the kid is and you move them up. We don't, in the old days, there's no more, you used to teach to the middle of the road and everyone above or below just sank or swim. Nowadays, you must, with your differentiation, cater for absolutely everybody. So you aim, you look at where the individuals are and you move them all up. We've got to make sure that we're free from discrimination. We can't openly name students with their disabilities, with any of their learning needs, health issues, family issues, the whole lot. So we've just got to make sure that we can actually cater for all those all at the same time, which is an absolute mammoth task, having been in the classroom for many, many moons. Next. The big thing is catering for these adjustments and the modifications. And I want to make sure we all understand the difference between an adjustment and a modification. Now, I understand, having done a bit of study and whatever over the years, I've been in special education probably for the last 29 years, that different states will have different definitions. But these are the definitions that I'll be using, and I just wanted to make sure it was clear when I'm referring to these what I'm talking about. So kids with adjustments are all those kids who are still working towards the same criteria and the same goals as the rest of the class. We're just differentiating how we present it to the kid, how the kid presents back to us, and what we're actually presenting to them. But they've got the same goals. Whereas a kid on a modified program is a highly individualised program. So they're normally our extensive kids or our substantial kids with NCCD. Those kids are actually working at different levels or different goals to the rest of the class. It doesn't mean, though, that if a kid's working towards a lower year level, say they're in year 5 and they're working towards year 3, we don't provide them with year 3 work. That was probably the big way it used to be many, many moons ago. When I first got into special education, you would just, everyone was telling you to just get grab the grade 3 curriculum or the work program or whatever, and just give it to the kids in year 5 who needed it. Nowadays, because we're doing such inclusive practices, we cater more for these kids on a modified program by looking at the same goals as the rest of the class, but lowering the expectations. The goals may not be exactly the same. However, we make sure that the students, once again, you start where they actually have started, and then you move them up the levels. So we make sure that the students' work doesn't look too different from their neighbours. We've got to look at the health work and their well-being. And the social emotional effect of all of these changes, and how all the kids want to look the same as everyone else in the classroom. When I work with teachers doing a modified program, that last dot point on that page, I actually look at the similar topic, but I actually look at a CARA. And I've just put the path to get to where I actually look, and that's so on the ACARA website. I look at the F to 10 Foundation to 10 curriculum. Then I look at the content descriptors and the achievement standards. And I actually have, like, for example, a year 3 open beside a year 5. So you can actually see the cognitive verbs that are changed, the different expectations. Year 3, they might be just defining or naming, whereas year 5, they're going into a bit more looking a bit deeper into what actually explaining, rather than just defining and whatever. But they're still on the same topic as their mate sitting right beside them. The goal is to not have them looking too different to their friends. Next. So who's actually responsible? It all falls back on the classroom teacher, not the learning enrichment department, the learning support department, or whatever. It should be the individual teachers who design the differentiation in the classrooms. However, learning enrichment or learning support, whatever you are calling your support team at your school, they are there to support you and to guide you and to help you write programs and whatever. But the legal responsibility always falls back on the individual teacher, because, as we always say, know your kids and know your kids well, so that you can actually cater for all those individual programs that are needed. Of course, the biggest thing is trying to gather and balance that across them all. That's why that last dot point, the old UDL, Universal Design for Learning, that I came across at an ISQ PD many, many moons ago, that sometimes what you do for one kid can actually help and support many other students within the classroom. Remember your UDL, absolutely vital. Thank you. So who actually needs the differentiating? We've got students who have their learning difficulties or learning challenges. So most of these don't have formal diagnoses. However, under NCCD, for example, may be imputed, or you may have a diagnosis which is pending. It could be that parents can't afford to get testing done, even though they're fully on board with it. Or you can't, in these days, you can't even get into the specialist, or you're waiting for 12 months, 18 months to get into someone to actually look at the official outline of exactly what is the issue with the kid. Then, of course, we've got our kids who actually do have a diagnosis. And they're the 4 categories under the NCCD that we look at now. And that's your cognitive diagnoses, your physical and environmental ones, your sensory. Remember, under NCCD, sensory is really only your physical and your hearing sensory issues. And, of course, your social emotional. Probably the hardest one is to make a big decision with is kids with autism, for example. Depending on the type of adjustments that are needed, they can either be cognitive or social emotional. So it actually depends on where the adjustments, or where the majority of adjustments are made, which of the categories you'll actually call them under the NCCD. We must make sure when we differentiate, we cater for those EALD kids with additional kids with additional languages at home. Make sure if you have any doubts, make sure you do your ESL band scaling with the kids to determine their reading, writing, speaking and listening needs, to make sure you're really catering for them. There's PDs and whatever with ISQ, I know for that. And of course, don't ever forget those extension kids. Absolutely vital in the classroom. Thank you. So what actually needs to be differentiated? A lot of people would fall into the trap when I first started, and even just a few years ago, where they think the adjusted and modified programs, etc., were mainly to do with assessment. But they're actually your everyday things in the classroom as well as your assessment. Whether the information or whether the assessment is presented orally, whether it's visually presented, or whether it's electronically presented. But just remember, whenever you're going to provide an adjustment in a class, in an assessment, the child must have practiced and rehearsed that differentiation strategy in the classroom on a regular basis, so they are comfortable. Otherwise, you're totally disadvantaging them by using it. They'll waste time, they'll get flustered, they won't be able to demonstrate their understanding. Thank you. So the next couple of slides are just, I won't read them all out, are ways to actually develop the inclusive strategies in your classroom. Making sure, once again, that you're catering for all the needs, the most difficult task of all. But when you're actually thinking about how am I going to cater for this, you get your class list at the beginning of the year. Hopefully, similar to what I do, I actually annotate every class list in the school with descriptions of every single child in the classes and what their needs are, whether they've got any diagnoses, are they in out-of-home care, have they got additional languages, are they extension kids, are they kids in foster care, or have they undiagnosed but still have those literacy and numeracy issues, or are they social emotional needs? So hopefully you get all that imparted out to your classroom teachers so they can start looking at it in their planning, in their lesson plans. And it needs to be done early on. Try not to leave it till just before an assessment or after you've actually planned the whole term's work. You really need to be catering for these kids right from the beginning in your planning stages and applying it to all the classwork and assessments. But in saying that, we've got to remember that some kids will have strengths in particular topics and strands within subjects. So, for example, in maths, a kid may be absolutely fantastic at their measurement or probability, for example, but when it comes to the basic number skills, being able to actually add, subtract, multiply, divide, they really, really struggle. So we've got to play to the kids' strengths. So we've got to make sure that any of the strategies we put in place are actually going to help those kids demonstrate their understanding, but also help their well-being and self-worth as well. Next one, please. There's some other things to think about when you're actually doing your planning. Make sure that you actually let the student tell you what they also like to do. Get to know the kid. As I said before, knowing our student is the key to any successful learning. Excuse me. Get to know their strengths, get to know their interest areas, because you can always play to those when you're trying to get them involved. Like came up in the survey at the beginning, keeping those kids engaged in the actual programs in the classroom by knowing their interests and what they really, really like doing outside of the classroom. Whether they've got a strength in sport or whether it's, whatever they've got their interest in, if it's craft, if it's an interest in cars, motors, motorbikes, whatever, horses, see if you can get that engaged. So you've got to apply that across all the different topics that you do. Making sure we're playing to all of those strengths, but making sure the students are familiar with the strategies that are being employed. Don't presume that the kid will have done a certain strategy last year. They may not have. Every teacher has a different way of looking at things. And that's what makes it all so fantastic in the classroom, because everyone is different and every student is different, as well as every staff member. And everyone will then benefit. Next. What actually is a reasonable adjustment? I made up this little diagram a while ago. I sort of half copied it from someone else, but then added my own spin to it. The main thing is we've got to balance what we're doing in our classrooms. So we've got to make sure that the disability should not cause a disadvantage to the child, but it should not give them an advantage over others as well. So things like when they're getting a reader or a scribe, or they're able to, in their classwork, to get the work read out to them electronically, text to speech. We've got to make sure that what's happening is being fair to everyone else. If their disability, is things like dyslexia, then of course their reading ability is going to be their biggest issue. So if we can get rid of that reading disadvantage they have, and provide them with the ability to actually use text to speech, for example, they can then demonstrate their understanding. We can't change the purpose of the classwork or the assessment if we're only doing adjustments. We've got to still work towards those same goals and the criteria as the rest of the class if we're doing adjustments. If we're doing modifications, of course, it will be slightly different goals and criteria depending on the child's abilities, their strengths and their challenges. Thanks. I always loved it from when I first saw this particular cartoon. I'm sure you've all seen it before. Every kid is so different. It's not fair if everyone's expected to do everything exactly the same way. Everyone's got their strengths. We know ourselves as teachers and as adults, we know there are different things that we will really thrive on, and there are things that we will really struggle with just because we're all so different. So please, whenever you're looking at things, when you're looking at how you're going to adjust in the classroom, see what you're going to do by looking at the different kids you've got and work to their strengths. That UDL, Universal Design for Learning. What works for one may work for others, then apply them. Next. These 5 types of adjustments are probably the key things you've got to think about when you're actually planning your adjustments. You've got to look at the time, the amount of time that is allocated to the classwork and assessment activities. So, I mean, under NAPLAN, the min and QCAA for ARAs is 5 minutes per 30 minutes in ARAs. In NAPLAN, it is 5 minutes per 30 minutes, but you can apply for extra time than that when you do your applications for your disabilities. Scheduling. When the classwork and assessment occurs. Some kids may need some extension time. Some kids may need to do it always in the morning because they've got a physical disability or an acquired brain injury, and by the afternoon they're absolutely exhausted. But if you can get them in the morning, we can actually get out of them exactly what they know, and they feel better because they can demonstrate that understanding. They lose all their frustrations, helps their self-being and self-worth. The setting, excuse me, where the assessment is completed or the classwork. Sometimes in all the schools I've been in, sometimes the kids, a small group of kids may go outside and work with the teacher aide or support staff to actually do their classwork or assessment, just to take away that the barrier where all the high anxiousness because they've got a crowd around them. There's always that extra noise that can occur in a classroom, etc. But sometimes it actually takes them going to a totally separate location. That's particularly if a kid needs a reader or a scribe, because we can't be reading out, everyone's going to be reading out at different paces or different needs in an exam in particular. So they really need to have their own area. If they've got a scribe, if they need a scribe, well, that definitely has to be a separate location because we can't have them telling everyone else their answers. And of course, the response, how the student actually responds to it. So if you've got kids, say, for example, who are selective mutes, they will definitely, or kids with high anxiety or kids with some autism may not want to get up and talk in front of their peers. So the responses can be done in smaller groups. They can be done just with the teacher, one-on-one. The kids may be able to do a voiceover. So instead of having their PowerPoint and talking in front of everyone with all that pressure, they could actually record the sound at home and then just play it to the class. They're still getting heard, they're still doing an oral presentation, but the pressure's off them. I've just recently been speaking to QCAA about year 11 and 12 kid with selective mutism, and another alternative which QCAA allows for those sorts of kids is their ability to actually annotate a complete script of what they would say if they were doing it orally, because those kids won't even want to do a talk over of a PowerPoint or talk even to one-on-one with the classroom teachers. They don't want to speak at all, but they want to get their message across. They want to get people to understand what they understand. So they do an annotated script, but in that script, they've got to actually tell everyone, in that script, you've got to actually note exactly how they want to say it. Are they going to emphasize something? So if they were doing it in person, would they be clapping their hands at a certain time? Would they be saying it louder? Would they be raising their voice? Whatever. Fully annotated is the way to go, and that's allowed. Next. When I look at the adjustments, I actually look, and it used to be in the old IEPs as well when I first started, and it changed over the years, but these are the most common ones. It was in the EAP system. Then I was going to put them in alphabetical order to make it life easier, but I felt there was a slight priority. But in saying that, it all depends on the kid and the situation. So instructional is probably the biggest area where adjustments are needed. how the information is actually disseminated to the student and how the student can respond. But it's how the instruction happens by the teacher. The communication between the student and the teacher, the curriculum, the actual, how the curriculum is actually presented. Is it presented orally? Is it presented electronically? Has it got visual cues, etc.? The environment, what do we need to do to make sure that kid feels safe and can actually be less anxious to actually process what's happening in the classroom? So the environmental may be they sit off to the side, particularly kids with a hearing impairment or a vision impairment. Vision impairments may sit towards the front. A hearing impairment will sit, if their left ear is the ear that's their poorer ear, make them sit with the poorer ear up against the wall. Have it so their best ear is out to the rest of the classroom. So they're hearing the majority of it at all. If they're lucky enough to actually be able to use an FM system, and however that device is worked or used, play to that as well. Remembering, I know when I taught at one previous private school, by the time I left, we had the speaker towers to go with the FM systems in every single classroom in the high school. That catered for ASD kids, ADHD kids, kids with anxiety, kids with ADD who tend to drift off. It helped people stay focused. And the best thing was it saved the teacher's voice. They spoke with their little microphone around their neck and everyone could hear it regardless of their needs. We've got their health and safety issues, particularly when they're working in unfamiliar environments, where there's equipment, science labs, sewing, cooking, you're doing an experiment in the classroom, whatever's happening, even out for sport, any of those activities that you do, whenever there's health and safety. And of course, the big one for a lot of the kids, we seem to have so many kids with social emotional issues due to quite a few reasons, whether that be family, prior experiences, whatever, or the diagnoses they have. The social emotional well-being of all these kids have to be catered for. Thanks. I'm not going to read through all the rest of these, but you'll be able to see them in more detail when you actually look at the recording. So I don't think there's a need to actually go through them all. But I know, like for instructional, so I've broken them up actually. Differentiation in the prep to year 9 or 10. There's about 6 or 7 slides there under each of the focus areas. And then I've got the differentiation up into our 11s and 12s and some suggestions for there. Some of the key things that I really want to draw attention to is like the third one there, simplifying it. So a lot of teachers, you know, in a mainstream HASS class, for example, your history, geography classes or whatever, or science, you'll present the kid with a whole paragraph. And there may be quite a few little points in there or many-parted questions in an exam to differentiate or make that easier for some of our kids. Provide them in bullet points or even numbers. So you actually separate all the separate parts of them. You're still providing them with the same information. You're still asking them same questions, but it just helps them break it down and decode what is being presented to them. Another big thing I want is the third bottom one, which is on handouts for kids, particularly with vision impairment. So kids with albinism, for example, or kids with a vision impairment. When, you know, like they need their fonts increased in size, etc. But don't just turn an A4 sheet into an A3 sheet. The desks aren't big enough and it really makes those kids stand out in the crowd. So the best thing to do is to actually, yes, enlarge it to A3 to start with, if it's a paper copy or if you can do it electronically. You halve what's on a page and then just enlarge that half. and eventually gets up to the same size, because we all should know that A4 doubled is A3. So if you double A4, you get A3. So enlarge it up onto a big piece of A3, cut it down the middle or however you want to do it so you get the right size font, then glue it on another sheet and then re-photocopy it, and it comes out beautifully. I had to do that for a kid with albinism at a school who was in the school choir. So she could go to all the Eisteddfods the same as everyone else, still hold a piece of A4. So all her booklets of music and all the words were A4 size, but they were actually double. She did have double the size of number of pages. However, she still looked from down the audience exactly the same as everyone else, but she could participate on the same basis as everyone else. Next. There's a few more still for instructional, because I think it's the biggest one. Mind maps, templates, exemplars, sentence starters are big key things, particularly for kids who it's just too big a task. The old chunking, only giving them part of an exercise. Don't give them the whole page at once. Give them the first question only. Make them go away and do that. Come back. Give them the next section only. Let them do it in bits and pieces. They won't feel overwhelmed. Next. Then we've got some for our communication, how we're communicating. That's how we're communicating to the student and how the student is communicating back to us. I can't emphasize enough the benefit these days of text to speech and speech to text. It should be on all the devices that we're using. My biggest goal since I joined special ed 20 whatever years ago it was now, I always want the kids to be independent learners as much as they possibly can. And our biggest goal should be to get these kids to be independent members of our community when they leave us at school. To do that, we've got to teach them how to use all the benefits that they've now got with electronics. So the old text to speech, speech to text. Kids use the speech to text when they're using messages when they have low literacy skills. The text to speech, after they do their research on an assignment, getting the computer to read out the results, to work out which is the best result to actually base their assignment on, etc. Processing time is highly important. Sometimes we actually say to the kids, if you think you're going to get stuck or can't remember to wait your turn, make a note on a sticky note or on the edge of your page in front of you what you want to say so that you can actually remember it when you want to. Next. Curriculum, I won't read any of those out. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. You can read them yourselves. Next. The environment, I think I've spoken about some of those. I don't know how many people have the wobble boards. The wobble boards and the fidgets, which you can buy now at any shop. Sometimes they may break easily, but sometimes kids will change what they want to fidget with. So sometimes it's actually better to have them a bit cheaper because they'll get sick of them. And variety always works. And I was always told when my boy got diagnosed with his ASD back when he was 4 or 5 years old, what works today may not work tomorrow. Have a bank of strategies up your belt because it's the only way you'll get there. And then, of course, you've got your health and safety. Don't forget with health and safety, remember what happens when you are in emergency fire drills, etc., as well as those science pracs and other practical situations, but mainly those drills and any emergency events. They sometimes get forgotten till it's too late. Thanks. And then, of course, you've got your social emotional, which hopefully people should be well and truly aware of by now. Making sure that they've got a space to go to. I know in my last 3 schools, or actually all of the schools I've ever been in, there's always been an area for the kids to go to. Here we call it the LEC for Learning Enrichment Centre break room. So it's a place where kids can come at lunchtimes or kids can come out in the middle of the day who get highly anxious. Some kids stay for just a few minutes, get themselves under control, and then they say, hey, miss, I'm ready to go back now. Or they're really overwhelmed and they come down and then they actually do their work in the LEC break room with us supporting them, managing whatever is causing their distress at the same time. But the kids really benefit from it if you can at all do it. Now, modifications, just remembering with modifications, try and keep them on the same topic as the rest of their class. They don't want to look different to everyone else. Make sure they've actually got an understanding of what's happening, but use those the content descriptions and achievement standards from ACARA. Compare the different year levels that the kids are working between, where they are compared to where they should be, to make sure that you've actually catering for them, but still having the same content. And a bit more on the modifications. Don't forget the font sizes, the overall page sizes, extra time, readers, scribes, use of laptops, all of those things. I don't know how many of you have got C pens in your schools. They're brilliant. It's a great tool. They're recognised by ACARA for year 11s and 12s to use. They look like a highlighter, and they'll actually just simply scan over top of a page of text, and it will actually read out to them what it has actually been scanned in. And they actually can put a headphone into a headphone jack on the device, so no one else will be disturbed. There is also, this year I've actually bought the exam version of it. So the exam version doesn't have, and that's the ones that can be used in year 11 and 12 in exams. They don't have a dictionary, etc. So the kids don't have any advantage for terminology and that sort of stuff. Thanks. So when we get to year 11 and 12, in class, basically you can do everything that you do in the other grades all the way through. But just remember that QCAA has restrictions on what they will allow and for what disabilities they will provide different adjustments. No modifications are allowed as such. It is only adjustments. That's why it's called ARA. So it's access arrangements. So how the students can access their testing or their assessment instruments. It's not just exams. It's assignments, projects, presentations, all of those things, drama, musical productions, the whole lot. And it's the reasonable adjustments. Remember, right back at the beginning, a reasonable adjustment is something where the student can demonstrate their learning and understanding on the same basis as their peers. They can demonstrate what they know the same as their peers. And there's a list there of basic adjustments which are usual by ARA. And that's it. Happy cat herding. Hope everything stays under control. Thank you.
Wow, I told you she knew her stuff. That was amazing, Kathy. You packed in so much in a really short space of time. I really appreciate it. Now, guys, I am conscious of the time. We do want to get to your questions. So remember, there's the Q&A box. We've already got a few there ready for you, Kathy, in a moment. But please add some more questions if there's anything you've thought of. In the meanwhile, I'm going to very quickly give you an overview of what IXL offers. In fact, Kathy, I know you're using IXL at your school. So how is that a tool that's helpful for you guys with differentiation and so forth?
We actually use it across all our grades, year 1 right up to grade 12. We use it for kids with learning support needs, the middle of the road, average child, as well as the extension. The extension kids absolutely love it, particularly in the maths area. It's used in the classroom. It's the best thing probably about it is that the kids can work on their goals or their missing or gap skills, as we call them, at home. So after they do their homework, I always suggest to the kids, you've done your diagnostic, these are your recommended skills, just do one of your recommended skills after you've done your homework, whether it be math or English, and they've got a bit of oomph, maybe they'll do one math and one English. But it really, we have seen the benefits. We've had a kid that turned up here in year 10 a couple of years ago from another school, and he had gaps down on across the board in grade 2 and grade 3. By us using the IXL extensively with him, or we actually took him out of 2 subjects in secondary, and we used it intensely in the classroom. He actually went up 2 year levels within 5 weeks just by intensive working on that. And the skills were kept. They were not some of these programs where you use them once and, you know, you move on and you've forgotten them all or whatever. It actually does stay on board.
Thank you. And I can see Colleen's actually just asked a question around that about using IXL for differentiation. So you've just answered the question. So thank you, Colleen, for your question. In case you don't know, IXL is an online platform. It's actually the biggest one in the States. In America, 25% of students are using IXL over there. But this is, of course, the Australian site that we're all using here. So in case you don't know, it's got maths and it's got English and amazing diagnostics and data in there, all in one platform, right from preschool up to year 12. So your school might be using online resources, plural. You probably don't need them all because you can get everything you need in IXL in one platform. And talking about differentiation and personalisation, I've used in pretty much everything over the years in terms of online resources. The key difference here is, well, this is an example of our diagnostic report. This is not only great for the teachers because it's showing me each strand in mathematics and numeracy where those students are landing. It's great for the students. You can see there it's actually showing what activities they now need to work on. It's completely personalised for that student. It's identified gaps and strengths and said this is what you now need to work on. And it's really supportive for students that need it. The questions are adaptive. So we could all start on the same activity, but it will work at the pace that we need. You get that little burst of positivity there. You can see here's a nice little number activity, Australian money. And there's the audio support as well, right up to year 8 to read out the questions. If you get it wrong, it's no big red cross. There's help and guidance. That explanation relates exactly to the question they're working on. I know a lot of teachers use those explanations for explicit teaching at the start of a lesson as well. It's fantastic for that too. And if a student still feels a bit stuck, there are recommendations down here. It's saying, why don't you try these? They're a little bit easier and a good lead-in that will help them get ready and better prepared to do that activity they've been asked to do. Like I said, it's highly personalised. This is Shakira's dashboard here, the student. You can assign tasks for students to do, or they can work independently. There's a lot going on in the background with IXL. So we'll go to Shakira's, we call it the recommendations wall. This has identified what skills, because we're all about building skills, what skills does Shakira need to work on or be extended on? So at any time you can say to your students, guys, just go on IXL, work through your recommendation wall, and you know they're working on what they need to be working on. So there's kind of 2 ways to use it. Teacher driven, you might be doing decimals, assign them some decimals work, and then they work independently because that's where it's so targeted and so effective. Now, I've got some special offers today for all of you lovely people who joined our webinar. If you are a teacher, anyone can go on our site. Any teacher can just go on our site, and you can do a 30-day free trial with your students. But the offer today is I'm doubling it. So scan that QR code and you get 60 days instead of 30 days, and you can include your students in that. Now, if you're a school leader, a decision maker in your school, you might want to consider this other offer, because we normally do what's called a paid pilot for 90 days. If you want a really comprehensive deep dive to trial IXL thoroughly at your school, normally there's a fee, but I'm going to waive it. So you can have a free 90-day pilot for your whole school. You can have everybody involved. And we don't mind what date you start. You don't have to start today. But I can only give away 1 per state or territory. So it's first in, best dressed. So scan that QR code if you think your school would like to do that 90-day pilot. We'll even throw in some training for your teachers. So one of the representatives, it might be me or whoever your local representative is, we'll do a Zoom, or if it's close by, we'll come in person and we'll provide a PD session for your teachers as well. All right, so thank you for that. Now, I can see there are lots of questions in the questions box. So I'm going to go through. Are you ready, Kathy? We won't get through everything. I know we've gone over time, but I think there are some important questions here. Melissa has asked, how will a modified students report look? What's it going to look like as a report compared to other students?
So in all the schools I've been in, we make sure you must be a statement on the report card which says the student, the so-and-so has worked a modified program. So where it has, if it's only in maths, for example, so-and-so has studied a modified program. At this current school, on our interim reports, there's actually a column where the teacher can actually pick if it's a modified. Because they've got a different criteria, as soon as you've ticked modified or you've made a statement to say they have worked a modified program, we know that grade is against the modified criteria. So kids on a modified program, if you're doing your job well, and if the kid's cooperating, of course, we all know that doesn't always happen, no kid should really be failing on a modified program. So everyone should be getting a C at least. But kids are capable of getting a B or an A at that modified criteria, which is if they're getting an A or whatever, it's more of an indication they're ready to move up a level. But it's
that might also,
reported.
Sorry, Kathy, to interrupt.
You're right.
Might also answer the next question then, because Constance has asked, how do you know if your adjustment that you've made to an assessment is too easy or too challenging? So I guess the proof is in the pudding in a way.
In a way, you've got to remember the integrity of tests. You've got to make sure that you are, like that, the balanced thing. You've got to make sure that you're not advantaging the child, so you're not giving things away. You've got to make sure, so say you're doing a multiple choice where everyone else in the class has got 4 options, give the adjusted kid maybe 3 options instead. Maybe the modified only has 2 options. You know, don't make it too simple, but make sure it's still challenging them and still meeting that criteria if you can.
Thank you. Now I've got another question, I think also from Constance. I'm not quite sure what you meant about text to speech and speech to text. A couple of our participants here have also chimed in to help answer that. So Kelly talks about with iPads, you can turn on a setting that will read the words. Is that what you were referring to? Yeah.
So speech to text is where it's the speech to text. So that's you dictating. So for example, in Word, and you can do it on iPads, you actually select dictate at the top of your Word screen, and a microphone comes up. As you speak, it will type out what the kid's doing. So that's speech to text. Text to speech is where you highlight what's on the screen and it will read it out. So that's text to speech.
Great, thank you. Jocelyn also mentioned, thank you, Jocelyn, about using immersive readers and dictate functions through Windows products.
Yeah, that's what I just spoke about.
Yeah, same thing. Okay, now Colleen was asking before about technology. She said some teachers are not so thrilled about using too much technology because students are using technology all the time. I guess my answer to that is you need to use it well. If you think about if you're using a textbook, whether it be English or maths or whatever subject, this technology, if it's used well, like an IXL product, it's bringing it to life. It's going far beyond what a textbook can offer because it's personalizing it. It's finding gaps and addressing those gaps. You know, how do you personalize and differentiate with a textbook? It's very difficult. Not to mention the data that is marking the work, and it's providing you with great data as well. So it's all about using it wisely. So I guess from my perspective, I just urge people to try it. And if you're already using other types of resources out there online, try it and compare. That's why we're offering the free trial. Now, I think we're just about done there. Sorry, Kathy.
Can I just say, I think the best thing is variety. kids will get bored no matter what you do if they're all on technology, or they're all doing, listening to the old chalk and talk all day long.
Yeah.
It's going to be the same. Variety is the key to keeping them engaged.
100%, I agree with you. And it's what I say to teachers all the time when I'm talking to them every single day. It's not like IXL is all you need. This will not be the only thing that you use. It might be the only thing you'll need for online, but you'll be using other resources as well. And thank you, Corey's just asked a really good question as well, because this relates to what you were talking about. Can you hide the year level on IXL? Yes, you can. So on the right, if you're already using it, on the right-hand corner, you can just click that in your profile settings and you can hide those year levels, which is like what you were talking about, Kathy. A lot of these students who need adjustments and modifications, they don't want to stand out from the crowd. And this is a way where they don't need to know that maybe you are assigning from a different year level, or maybe they have been working at a slower pace and they don't need to know that. So yes, you can certainly do that. All right, I think we're just about there. I know, I'm sorry we've gone over time. I just want to say a huge thank you to Kathy. I think what you shared with us today, all that information in a short space of time, wow. So thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to everybody out there. We had a lot of people all around Australia joining us today. Don't forget those special offers for IXL. You can double your free trial if you're a teacher, or you can have a free paid pilot for 90 days. It would be a great thing to do in term 3, because you'll start to think about 2025 soon enough. So trial it throughout term 3, and then you're going to know which way to go for next year. Now, when you log out, there's going to be a very quick little survey for you to do about this webinar. I really appreciate it if you could do that, because that helps us plan for future webinars. Thank you for everybody joining us today. Thank you again, Kathy. And
thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Kathy. And I won't say good luck for next Wednesday night State of Origin, but good luck with everything else that you do.
Woo. Go the Maroons.
Thanks again, everybody. Bye for now. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.